the difference between being a contractor as a Pilates instructor compared to being employed as a casual employee.
Yes.
So do you want to start there?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, it comes down to the tax legislation, and it isn't black or white. It is kind of grey because there are quite a different number of elements that go into making up the determination of whether you're an employee or a contractor. Now, the way it works is in the past, people have kind of put their case forward to a court and a decision has been made by a judge. And then that forms a bit of case law history to kind of give a bit of reference to the legislation on the area. So the ATO actually has a really awesome tool that you can go on, and it will ask you a bunch of questions about your specific contractual arrangement with your employer. And what it does, it will ask you different elements about your contract, and we can run through those today. So there's 6 different elements that it will look at. So
these are kind of things that if people are getting offered, are we going into contractor or casual employee here? Or is this covers both to kind of define which you are? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so this covers to like what you're actually defined as.
Okay.
Is that what you were questioning? No.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Run through that. So the first one is essentially your ability to subcontract or delegate your work. So in the Pilates industry, most people are contracted for themselves to go in and teach a class, and we're not actually able to just delegate that class to anyone. It kind of is looking at if you were operating as a business and say had like 5 or 10 different instructors sitting underneath you, and you're contracted to the business, and then you can send in instructor A to go and teach that class, instructor B to go and teach that class. So that kind of arrangement would indicate more of a contractor, whereas if it's you that must teach the class, then that's more indicative of it being an employee relationship.
Okay, that's really good to know.
Yeah. So if in the case that you're sick, for instance, an instructor comes in to cover your class for you, that's not really considered a subcontract or delegation. So usually in that case, the studio pays that cover directly, like they invoice the studio directly, and you're not involved in that loop in terms of who's getting paid and stuff. So generally, people would be considered an employee under that particular item. And then the next one is looking at the basis of the payment. So as instructors, we generally get paid either an hourly rate or a rate per class.
Yeah.
That is actually quite indicative of it being an employee relationship. For it to be a contractor, if you kind of think of like a plumber, for instance, and you would engage a plumber, you would get a quote from them first. So they would send a quote out for how much they think the job would cost. Then they'd come in and then you'd get, you'd pay for that particular job. So that would be more indicative of a contractor relationship. And then the next one is who provides the equipment and the tools. So again, for instructors, it's generally the studio that provides like the reformers, the trapeze tables, the mats and all the bits and pieces. So that is indicative of it being an employee relationship. For example, if you ran a mat class and you're the one that brought in all the mats and blocks for people to use, then that's kind of more indicative that you're running your own business and it's a contractor.
So maybe if there was a Pilates instructor who was teaching in a corporate environment and they did provide all that stuff, but they were teaching for somebody else. Yeah. Right.
The next one is who takes on the commercial risk. So for instructors, I feel like this one tends to lean more towards being a contractor. So it's us that needs to take out our insurance. So if a client sued us, it would come through our insurance. And also if a client cancels, for instance, we're usually the one that loses the income, not the studio.
Yeah, I think that one is a little bit interesting actually, because when I've been offered a casual employee arrangement in the past, it's been stated in there that then I am covered by the studio's insurance.
Yes.
But then I'm still expected to have mine anyway. Like, I think you'd be silly not to have your own anyway. So yeah, I wonder how that works in reality.
Yeah, I guess insurance is one of those tricky ones.
Yeah, just get cover for everything.
Yeah. So the next one is who has control over the work. So if it's a studio that's kind of directing you to teach the class in a certain way, or it's kind of got a policy around their style of teaching, for instance, that's more indicative of an employee relationship. Mm-hmm. If you have the freedom to kind of teach what you like, and I guess a bit more freedom in how your classes are run and all that type of thing, that's more indicative of the contractor. And then the last one is independence. So if you're kind of working within the business or the studio and you're kind of considered part of the studio, I kind of look at this one like, for instance, my business name for my Pilates, I call Angela Marie Pilates. And clients come into my studio, but they don't come in to see me as Angela Marie Pilates. They come in to see me as part of the studio or the clinic.
Yeah.
So that is more indicative of it being an employee relationship rather than the contractor. Mm-hmm. But say you are kind of, I don't know, the clinic or the studio had like a separate room that was specific for the Pilates, and you kind of, it's almost like you were renting that space. Yeah. Renting that space for your kind of little business, and that would be more of the contractor
which
arrangement.
I think is more common. That kind of subleasing is more common in the US,
right,
than Australia.
Yeah. So they're the 6 different things. So as you can kind of see, I think like 4 out of the 6 often indicate it's an employee. 2 of the 6 kind of indicate that it's the contractor. I think the ATO does give more weight to the first 3, like the ability to subcontract, the basis of the payment, and who's providing the equipment and the tools. I think
that's good to know as well.
Yeah, so I think those are the kind of the main ones, and if they're a bit grey, then they kind of go to the other ones. And you can kind of see that when you do I go through the tool on the ATO website, it asks you those first 3, and if you answer a certain way, it'll be like you're considered an employee.
Yeah, it's so good that you went through those points and gave really clear examples, Angela. I think that's going to be so helpful, because I've been on the ATO website before and I've tried to do that myself, and when I see fancy words and things like that, my brain just wants to run, and I just don't really comprehend it. I find it hard to just be really clear about an example related specifically to me, so I think that'd be really helpful as a starting point, because we all have individual circumstances. So if everybody went there and maybe listened to this at the same time, just to check back in, maybe I could do little snippets of this video to kind of understand what they're really talking about there.
Yeah. And that's something I can help people with as well. I can run through that, sit down with them over the phone or do it together. And then in terms